January 2005. A brand new year, a brand new notebook, very old. The back has come off, but my spiral bound notebook to keep a list of everything I've read. Things are changing, but not yet. Still working at Frame Art Galleries, still live in North Ridgeville, Ohio, next to the police station. But I read a lot of books in January of 2005, so let's jump right in. The first book that I read was Green Lantern Sleepers, Book 1 by Christopher J. Priest and Mike Barron. It's the first of a trilogy, and it focuses on the Kyle Rayner Green Lantern, but it does jump around in time, so there's some stuff that takes place in the past when Hal Jordan was Green Lantern, and it's got Black Canary and Green Arrow, Hal Jordan all working together. But even further in the past, a ring and a power ring ended up in World War II, and then some kid gets it and becomes a Sinestro. Not the Sinestro, but a Sinestro. And all of this eventually is going to lead up to the modern day, where Kyle Rayner having problems with his girlfriend Jade, who's also a Green Lantern, but they're going to have to deal with some Sinestro stuff. So lots of Green Lantern action with lots of Green Lantern history. Green Lantern Sleepers, Book 1, Christopher J. Priest and Mike Barron. After that, not the greatest explanation of that book, but what are you going to do? After that, we have Nobody Runs Forever by Richard Stark. This is a Parker novel. It is the first of a 3-part epic, or saga, as it says on the back cover. And the 2 books that follow this are the last 2 books in the Parker series. So this 3-part saga makes up the end of the Parker run. But in this, it starts with a poker party Parker's at, and it's for these people that have been invited to this party are supposed to form a group of thieves that are going to pull a job, but things go wrong, and so it breaks up. But then someone from the party contacts Parker about a different job, stealing an armored car. Parker takes the job, but he's not happy because it's filled with amateurs, and that's never good. So you've got all these different people who perhaps have different agendas, and this ends up with spoilers. Book ends up with Parker on the run. It's going to lead into the next book, but great stuff. The Parker stuff is always fantastic. So Nobody Runs Forever by Richard Stark. After that, we had Green Lantern Sleepers, Book 2 by Christopher J. Priest and Michael Ahn. A-H-N, Ahn. This one focuses on Alan Scott, the first Green Lantern. Although, again, we're sort of jumping around in time. There's Hal Jordan stuff. Excuse me. And now there's apparently a bunch of clones of Sinestro. But, as I said, this is focusing on Alan Scott. If there's anyone who doesn't know, the modern Green Lantern Corps, relatively speaking, their rings had a weakness to yellow. The color yellow was their weakness. They were ineffective against anything yellow. I don't think they have that weakness anymore because of something that happened a few decades ago. But the reason I bring it up is because Alan Scott, the original Green Lantern, his ring had a weakness to wood. I remember someone making a joke that neither Alan Scott nor Hal Jordan would be any good against a number 2 pencil. But anyway, this really gets into Alan Scott's origin and the things he's fighting in the past, but it's all going to tie into Hal Jordan, Kyle Rayner, the Sinestros, the antimatter universe. It's all going to eventually lead up to what happens in book 3. Alan Scott's an interesting hero. He's had sort of a resurgence recently, and I believe his ring was, at least back in the day, I don't know about modern um, Alan Scott, but I believe his ring was magic, powered by magic. It still had the lantern and everything, but it was magic as opposed to the Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps and all of that being a science. The Green Lantern, Sleepers, Book 2, Christopher J. Priest, and Michael Ahn. After that, we have Stolen by Kelly Armstrong. This is Book 2 of the Women of the Other World series. And we get the return of Elena Michaels from the first book. She was, at least in the first book, the last female werewolf. And in this one, this young witch comes to Elena and tells her that someone has been kidnapping other supernatural beings. Now, as far as Elena is concerned, witches aren't real, and I don't think she doesn't know that there are other supernatural beings. She just thinks there's werewolves, which are natural, apparently, according to her. But she's soon going to find out when she's kidnapped and imprisoned with a bunch of other supernatural beings. It seems there's a multimillionaire trying to collect all of the various creatures, vampires, werewolves, witches, all these other things. So Elena's going to have to figure out how to escape and save everybody and stop the bad guy. Stolen by Kelly Armstrong. Excuse me. Then we have Extremes by Christine Catherine Rush. And this is another retrieval artist novel, the second retrieval artist novel. I think it's the second one. I talked about the first one. I can't look back because the 3-ring binder's over there. But I talked about the first retrieval artist novel a video ago, or 2 or 3 videos ago. It's science fiction, and in this book, we have Miles Flint. He's a retrieval artist, and another retrieval artist dies. Miles Flint thinks it's murder. Meanwhile, we have a cop named Noelle Dorici, and she's investigating a murder, and somehow these 2 murders are going to tie together, and so Miles Flint, Noelle Dorici are going to have to work together and figure things out. This is set in a science fiction world. It's so not everything's taking place on Earth and such. It's a world where Earth is part of a federation. I don't know if they call it that, but part of the agreement of being a part of this is that humans have to abide by the laws of other alien races on their planets, which we may or may not agree with. I think the last time I talked about, there's a Star Trek The Next Generation episode where Wesley accidentally, they're on a planet somewhere, Wesley accidentally crushes some flowers, Wesley Crusher accidentally crushes some flowers, not knowing that that's a huge no, it's against the law, he's going to be executed. So it's that kind of thing. If you're a human and you're on that planet, you crush some flowers, by our agreement, you are subject to their laws, you will be executed. And that's sort of where the retrieval artists come in. So anyway, again, this is a murder mystery. This is sort of a science fiction police procedural / thriller. And I must have liked the first one because I read the second one. That's Extremes by Christine Catherine Rush. Then we have a weird one, Ill Wind by Rachel Kane. And I talked in the last video, I believe it was, about series, starting a new series, what catches your eye, how far you go. So Ill Wind is the first in the Weather Warden series. And our main character is Joanne Baldwin. She is a weather warden. So there's the Warden's Council. And basically there are people that can control the elements. earth, water, fire, air. And the strongest of those can control multiple elements. They're the weather wardens. They can control the weather. And they have been. This council has been around forever. Mother Nature would have killed us all off if the weather wardens weren't affecting the weather and keeping us alive. But Joanne Baldwin is accused of murder and corruption, and so she's on the run, and she needs to find this guy who is the most powerful warden there is, but he's also on the run because he stole 3 bottles filled with gin with a D, DJINN. So magic in this world other than just controlling the weather. But she has to find him to help clear her name. I don't know that I've read any more of these. It seemed like an interesting concept. I don't know that it was pulled off. But Ill Wind by Rachel Kane, first in a series, so there's more of them out there. We'll find out together if I ever moved on to some others. Pardon me. Next up, we have Endurance by S.L. Vale, or however I keep pronouncing it. This is a Stardock novel, 3rd one. So obviously I enjoyed these. I actually saw a couple of them at Half Price Books last time I was there. I was tempted to pick them up, but I got some other things instead. But Endurance by S.L. Vale. So we have Dr. Shariho Torin, our main character. She's a doctor. In the first book, she's has gotten into some trouble or pissed somebody off, so they sent her off to some space station / planet on the outskirts of space, known space, to be a doctor out there. Shenanigans ensue. At the end of the second book, this shitty guy was trying to mess up her life, and she ended up giving him to some slavers. But then she's betrayed, and she ends up with the slavers as well. So now in this book, our doctor is a slave with these slavers, but she's doing her doctor stuff, trying to keep people and aliens alive, and of course trying to figure out a way to free herself and probably the rest of the slaves, I would assume. So I like this stuff. Little ER in space with all sorts of crazy shenanigans going on. Endurance by S.L. Vale. And next time I'm at Half Price Books, unless something really, really big catches my eye, I may pick up some of these. I may start getting the Stardock books again. Next up, I was shocked. Shocked, I say. Next up, Kent, Montana, and the Really Ugly Thing from Mars by Lionel Fenn. This is a spoof of old alien invasion movies. It's just ridiculousness. A really ugly thing from Mars comes down to New Jersey to take over the world. Kent, Montana, and his friends, maybe some enemies, I don't know, have to stop it. Really just funny spoof stuff. The shocking thing, the thing I just learned when I looked this up to reacquaint myself with it, Lionel Fenn is a pen name. That's not a real person's name. It may be somewhere in the world. This book was actually written by Charles L. Grant, the amazing horror author. Charles L. Grant. You know what? I don't want to say the wrong thing. So I'm just gonna, you can watch me look things up on the computer. Because maybe there's a different Charles L. Grant. Nope, that's the guy. Just wanted to make 100% sure, because I think most of the books I have just say Charles Grant on them. But yeah, Charles L. Grant. He's written X-Files novels. He was editor of the Shadows anthology series, the Ox Run Station books, And a bunch of standalone novels, some novels based on old Universal monsters. Just very atmospheric writer, in my opinion. I have a nice stack of his. I have one hardback and a bunch of paperbacks. And then under the name Lionel Fenn, he had this Kent, Montana series that spoofed all sorts of different things. The fact that it's Charles Grant blows my mind and is more important to me than what this book was about. Although I wouldn't mind rereading this. I like a good spoof. After that, we have Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, The Lost Cult by E. Knight. E. Knight was the author of this vampire. I don't remember what it was called, but basically space vampires had taken over the Earth, and it's about the pockets, the resistance, the human resistance, fighting these space vampires. I read the first two. I've talked about the first two. Was not impressed with those. I think those two are the only ones that I read. But I figured I'd give his Tomb Raider book a try. In this, Lara Croft, there's an archaeologist. Well, Lara Croft is the star, obviously. So there's this archaeologist who destroys all of his research, everything he has on this ancient tribe from Peru, and then he's murdered. So Lara Croft was a friend of his, a contemporary, a co-worker. She's going to investigate. She ends up in Peru, and it turns out that someone is trying to resurrect these people, the Manet, I'm not sure, resurrect them and use them to take over the world. So the guy apparently, destroyed all his stuff, so this couldn't be done. But Lara Croft has to figure out what's going on. She's going to end up going up against a colleague who's on the bad guy's side. A rollicking adventure. I don't recall anything about it, if the writing was any good. But I've played a little bit of Tomb Raider. I've seen one of the movies. But I like the adventurous aspect of the stories. It's Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, The Lost Cult by E. Knight. Excuse me. Then we have More Adventures of Samurai Cat by Mark E. Rogers. There are 3 stories in here. This is heavily illustrated. I'll show you some of the illustrations because I love his artwork. So first, let me see if it's actually... Yes, so we have a samurai cat in King Arthur's court, which is essentially what it sounds like. Samurai Cat and his little companion. That's his little companion down there. End up in King Arthur's court fighting versions of King Arthur villains and things, because this is a spoof. But it also has an adventurer in a fedora named Wisconsin Platt. The second story is A Fighting Cat of Mars, which is, of course, spoofing John Carter of Mars, A Princess of Mars, all that. Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff. And then The Empire State Strikes Back, of course, spoofing Star Wars. And Wisconsin Platt shows up again for some reason. These stories are absolutely hilarious. I love the Samurai Cat stuff. And I'll show you some illustrations. Show you the full color. There's black and white, but look at those full color. Look at that full color illustration. This one's not the greatest because of the seam, but great stuff. I couldn't tell how well that was showing because I was holding it up in front of my face. There were a couple other good ones that I wanted to share. And I could show you some of the black and white ones. There's a nice one. That is a very Frank Frazetta feel to it. But the illustrations are all by Mark E. Rogers. There's a little King Arthur type stuff. Absolutely hilarious books if you can find them. I think I'm only missing one of this series, but More Adventures of Samurai Cat by Mark E. Rogers. Great, great stuff. After that, did I skip anything? Just want to make sure because this is a long list. Doopa 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 doop. Okay, next up we have The Arcanum by Thomas Wheeler, and this is it's about a group called the Arcanum that it fights on the side of good in the battle of good versus evil, light versus dark. And the leader of the Arcanum is murdered. And so one of its top agents, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, is going to investigate. And he's investigating around London, and he ends up in New York, traveling the world, trying to figure out who killed the leader of the Arcanum, or Arcanum, however you'd say it. Arcanum, I think, sounds better. Let me know in the comments if you know the proper pronunciation. But throughout in his adventures, he runs across and works with or goes up against Harry Houdini, Marie Laveau is how I always pronounce it, H.P. Lovecraft, Aleister Crowley. Again, trying to solve this murder, battling back the forces of darkness. I love this kind of stuff where you have some wild, supernatural horror story using real people, versions of real people. It's The Arcanum by Thomas Wheeler. The penultimate book that I read in January of 2005 is Zero Over Berlin by Joe Sasaki, and it's Joh. So hopefully it's just pronounced Joe. Joe Sasaki, who, according to what I read, is like the Japanese equivalent of Tom Clancy and Jack Higgins. And this story takes place during World War II, and essentially Hitler wants to do some damage by air to certain targets, doesn't have the proper airplanes to do it, but he's heard about the Zero that the Japanese have made. He wants to start making German versions of it, so they need to get Zero or Two to Germany so they can sort of reverse engineer it and start building their own. And so this is the story of the pilots, the Japanese pilots, trying to fly these Zeros and get them to Berlin. They can't go over Russia, they can't go the other way, and they essentially can't go east, can't go west. They have to find some route. They have to find secret refueling stations to get them to Berlin. And this was I don't have the translator's name. It's originally a Japanese novel. It's translated into English. I found it very, very interesting. It's a interesting political World War II thriller. But I looked. I didn't really have to look it up because I remembered exactly what this book was about. But I chose to look it up, see if there was any other information I could find, and I happened to glance at the reviews. Excuse me, simply because sometimes the information in the little description for the book at the beginning of the page on Amazon doesn't give me much information. So I'll go to the reviews and see if there's more information that I can share with you, or to at least trigger the memories for me. There was a review that was it only 1 star? It was a very low rated review because, as the reviewer says, the book wants you to cheer for the Axis. They said it's a political book that makes the Germans and the Japanese the good guys and wants you to cheer for them, and that's disgusting, essentially. But the way I see it, it's a It's a fictional book in a historical setting written by a Japanese person from the Japanese perspective. So you can't write a story, I don't think so. At least can't write one well. Can't write a story about the Japanese in World War II where the Japanese are the main characters and have them be the bad guys of the story. And since they're allies with the Germans, and the whole point is the Germans want the planes, the Japanese are trying to get them the planes. And they're the protagonists of the story. I'm not going to say heroes. They are the protagonists of the story, and the allies are the antagonists of the story. I don't think the author wants you to cheer for Nazis or for the Japanese that were allied with the allied. Pardon my pronunciation there for a second. Allied with the Nazis. I don't think that's the point of the story. But the Japanese and the Germans are the protagonists. So I just thought it was odd that someone would take that, write that review, take that perspective of the book. Maybe I'm completely wrong. I don't think so. But anyway, Zero Over Berlin by Joe Sasaki. I really enjoyed this. And then finally, the last book that I read in January of 2005, Dark Ages, Cappadocian by Andrew Bates. This is the third book in the Dark Ages series of 13 books covering all of the vampire clans from the Dark Ages from White Wolf Publishing's World of Darkness series. And so in this particular series, there was the Vampire 13-book series, Vampire the Masquerade clan saga, that each book was one of the vampire clans, and it's sort of the story is interlocked, where you read the first book and then the second book might take place during the events of the first book and then a little bit after, or maybe some of it even before, interlocking these books completely in chronological order, not overlapping each other, but telling a longer story. And in this third book, after the fall of Constantinople and everything that went on there, we have our main character is Constantia. She's a high priestess of the Cappadocian clan of vampires, and she is looking for this other vampire who might hold the key to these dark prophecies, this dark future that Constantia is seeing. So she's trying to find him, but he has an agenda of his own. I believe he escaped Constantinople when it was destroyed. That's all I could say, because I don't remember anything else. I couldn't find anything else in the description. It's just a giant saga of the Dark Ages vampire clans. But, one note, the Cappadocians don't exist in the modern world of darkness. So, and I don't remember if this is addressed in this series, but the Cappadocians either completely disappear and are replaced by a new clan, or the Cappadocians eventually evolve into a different clan. Because the first two books were clans that exist in the Dark Ages and the Modern Age, if I remember correctly. But the Cappadocians do not exist in the Modern Age, so something happens to them. But anyway, that's it. That is everything that I read in January of 2005. We're moving along. We're going to see some changes. Maybe. We're going to see a lot of the same kind of things, but we're going to see a lot of new stuff too. New authors, new books, or, well, old books. It's 2005. But we're going to see new authors with a lot of things being read by these authors that are new to me. I looked ahead a couple of months just to see kind of what might be coming up. And let's see. I had a question, and I don't recall. I had a question already, and then I went through all this, and I forgot what it was. So let me take a look at the list here, see if anything jumps out at me. Um, for what that question may have been. Oh, I think it was going to be something simple. Excuse me. Have you read a translated work? If so, and I guess especially if more than one, what is your favorite translated work? Relatively simple question. One might think, because my answer, it's tough. It's a tough answer because I could go with something that I relatively recently read, Bullet Train, which was made into the movie with Brad Pitt and a bunch of other people. And that was fantastic. It was hilarious. It was exciting. It was fast paced. But then I've read like Ringu, The Ring, fantastic horror novel. Uh, I assume that like Crime and Punishment and the Brothers Karamazov, however you would say it, I assume those were actually translated. I assume they were originally in Russian, and I enjoyed both of those. Although I wouldn't put those up at the top. I've read things like The Book of Five Rings, The Tao Te Ching, The Way of the Samurai. All of those had been translated into English, and I'm sure there's more. I just can't remember what all of them are. So I think right now I would probably say Bullet Train. Maybe because it's just the freshest in my mind. Excuse me. Wow, it's got to be a toss up. I've also read Loop. I think is the second book. Whatever the second book in the Ring trilogy is, I've read that as well. Possibly a toss up between Ringu and Bullet Train. Now I have the prequel to Bullet Train. Haven't read that yet, but that's going to be coming up. One of the book bundles I'm doing is books translated into English, and I have 4 at the moment that are on that list that I'm going to read. One of them is the prequel to Bullet Train. So I'm going to say Bullet Train and Ringu, or The Ring. I'm not even sure about what the actual title is. It might be Ringu if you get the Japanese version, and just Ring if you buy the American translation. But if I were pushed, I would say The Ring, simply because it's horror, and that's my preferred or my favorite genre. But The Ring, Bullet Train, both fantastic. But what about you? Have you read translated works? If so, what's your favorite? Let me know in the comments below. If you have any comments, questions, or corrections, please put those in the comments below. Comments are open for spoilers. Just post a spoiler warning. We try to be polite here on my channel. Please like, share, and subscribe, all the usual YouTube stuff. If you'd care to follow me on other social media, I'll have links to my Instagram and Bluesky in the description below. That's all I have for you this week. So until next week, read more books.